What's up, guys? Tim Little. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today's video, we are talking about fall bass fishing. Where do these bass go? And more importantly, the best baits, the best techniques to catch them. Let's go. It is officially fall. Those cooler nights have come in. We got our lows down into the mid 50s, and the fish are chasing. The fish are chomping. Water levels dropping. Cooler nights, cooler water temps. So it is officially that fall time of the year. So today's video, going to do another seasonal video. You guys know that we do that every year. The different 4 seasons, the transitions. You know, a couple weeks ago, I did a fall transition video to kind of get your mind going, thinking about where these fish are going to go. Matt just did a top 5 baits for the month of October. So it is here, guys. Pretty soon we're gonna start talking about the winter transition. What's really cool is today's video, we're gonna break down the shallow fish and the deep fish. We're gonna completely separate them. Got some different baits and different techniques for each. But what's really cool is those deep fish, a lot of these patterns will kind of coincide with that winter transition, and you'll be able to catch fish with a lot of those same techniques all the way through winter and into that pre-spawn mode. So understand that fall is here, cooler nights, cooler weather, and that means you're gonna have a lot more room on the lake. A lot of guys are out hunting, either dove or up in a tree stand chasing deer. You're gonna have a lot more freedom to run about the lake, and the fish are active, right? With those cooler water temps comes more comfortable conditions for those fish. They're gonna be extremely aggressive. So fall time can be an amazing time to be out on the water and catch a lot of fish. Now on the flip side, because these fish are gonna be schooling up, they're gonna be covering water, it's important for you as the angler to cover water as well, because now, you know, you might have fished an entire pocket during the summer. Maybe you're fishing a grass flat or something like that, and you'd catch fish all the way through along that grass flat. But now with the fish really keying on baby bluegill, baby crappie that have spawned this last spring, or shad, or threadfin or gizzard shad, those fish are gonna start schooling up. So they're gonna vacate a lot of the area and really congregate into one area. So it's important for you as an angler to cover water, because you might go 80% of the way down that grass flat where you've been catching fish all summer and you don't even buy a bite. But when you get to the end or get to the spot, you might get all of your bites there. So understand the difference. There might be a lot of water this time of the year that are actually fishless. There's no bass there because they're congregating up, and they are chasing the schools of bait. So today we're gonna talk about highland reservoirs, lowland reservoirs, natural lakes, ponds, and your river systems. And then we'll kind of go into how to approach each, and then the favorite baits or techniques for each of those, so you catch fish all the way through fall. Again, like I said, it's all about the bait fish. It's all about schooling fish. So you're gonna want to cover water and find those active fish all the way through into winter. So let's talk. I got these are actually rods out of my rod locker. So I got rods laying all over the place, kind of broken up into shallow and deep. Let's talk about the different types of fisheries, and then we'll kind of talk about, let's just talk about the different types of fisheries. So a highland reservoir. We get asked all the time, you know, am I fishing a highland reservoir? Am I fishing a lowland reservoir? You know, what are the differences? So those of you guys that haven't followed us through, you know, one of these seasonal videos before, a highland reservoir is typically a clear water, deeper kind of canyon-esque style of body of water. Typically, the telltale sign of a highland reservoir versus a lowland reservoir. A highland reservoir is going to have a fairly narrow dam, but a really tall dam. So it's going to be damming up that river in that canyon kind of area, and you're gonna have lots of long river arms, lots of main lake and secondary points, gonna have a lot of bluff walls, a lot of real steep transition contour lines. That is going to be your highland reservoir. So again, fairly short compared to a lowland reservoir dam, and it's gonna be a lot taller. Whereas a lowland reservoir, your dam could be 1 mile or 2 miles long, sometimes broken up into multiple dams, depending on where they have to dam up the water. But you're not gonna have a lot of those long river arms. You're not gonna have a lot of main lake points or secondary points. You're gonna have more of kind of a bowl style-esque kind of a main body with humps and saddles and that sort of stuff. You're not gonna have real abrupt dropped contour lines unless you have some kind of creek channel or something. But so going back to the highland reservoir, this time of the year, fish are going to be shallow and fish are going to be deep. We've talked about that in that fall transition video. Not going to really go too in depth on that again because we just did. But understand that there's basically two different areas of the lakes to catch them. So if you're a guy that wants to fish shallow, my first tip is to check the first arm, bay, or pocket, first couple of those next to the dam. Now, the reason I suggest that is a lot of times during the summer, those fish are offshore, they're chasing their bait, or they're down deep in rock piles down there in that cooler water. They go deeper. As these fish get up on these shad balls and start kind of acting like pelagic fish, offshore fish, they chase those balls and they want to corral them into something. So they take those shad balls from deep and they push them shallow. A lot of times out there near the dam is going to be some of your deeper water, your more consistent water, temperature water, and those fish are going to move to the very backs of those cuts. So that would be the first place I would check for shallow. I'm going to go all the way to the very back of that cove or that cut, and I'm going to look for fish blowing up. I'm going to look for little ripples on the water, signs of bait fish. I'm going to use my side imaging. I'm going to use my 2D, my forward facing 360, kind of use my electronics to see where those fish may be. With the shallow fish, it's a little bit easier because when you get into the backs of those pockets, you might still have a fairly significant grass line, or you might have, some shallower water where those fish have pushed those fish super shallow. And then, like I talked about in that last video, you can see them grenading those fish or pushing them up on the shore, blowing up on them on the bank, shad flopping on the, I've seen it all, shad flopping on the shoreline because they blow up and they push them up on the shoreline. Again, it's an aggressive time of the year. So again, check those pockets off of the main body closest to the dam. And I typically, if I'm trying to find that shallow water bite, I'm running to the very, very backs. If there is an arm or a pocket or a bay that has kind of a creek channel that goes into it, a lot of times those fish, even though they have those bait fish corralled in the back, they might hang on that little lip, that contour line where that shallow water meets the deep water, and they'll kind of hold there and then push the shad or the bait fish in the very back. But for that case, that instance, that's where I'm throwing topwater. This time of the year, I always have a topwater bait tied on. And I'm not gonna go too in-depth on baits. I'll link everything down below in the video description. But like I said, we just did a top 5 baits. We just did a fall transition. I do have a couple baits I'm going to add to the list because now that we are truly in fall, it's kind of my bread and butter all the way through into winter. So I will add those to the previous video. But like I said, everything will be linked down below in the video description. But 100%, you have to have some kind of topwater tied on, because you get in that scenario, you get all the way in the back of that pocket and those fish are blowing up. Obviously without grass, you're gonna need some kind of walking bait. That shower blows, 105. Now, let me back up a little bit. It's all about matching the hatch. It doesn't matter which bait I'm talking about today. You know, yesterday I was out fishing on Chickamauga and I noticed the bait was extremely small. I had to downsize my underspins, downsize my frog to get bit. So pay attention to what's going on around you. If you see, you know, maybe some floating bait fish, or you see some dead shad kind of, you know, or wounded shad in the water, pay attention to the size. You see them swimming around, make sure you're wearing some polarized sunglasses. You see them swimming around, the shad balls by you, pay attention to size, because you might want to downsize your top water, okay? Like I said, yesterday, I had to downsize my frog. So if I'm in that same situation, I'm in that very back of that cut, in that Highland Reservoir, that's that little Kayara, little finesse frog, and I find that those fish are in the grass, the remaining grass, that's where I'm gonna go with a frog. This time of the year, it doesn't matter if I'm on a lowland, a highland, a reservoir, a pond, I usually kind of have a 1, 2, or 3 punch with my frog. So I talked about these guys, okay, downsizing, upsizing if you have to. Another great one's that Mega Bass, that Giant Dog X. Don't let the name fool you. Giant is not necessarily giant. Here it is compared to a 105 Shower Blows. That's an awesome walking topwater bait. But either way, your favorite walking topwater bait. Now, getting back to the frog, so you find yourself in that situation with the grass. Now this applies to your ponds and your lowland reservoirs as well, even your river systems. I have some kind of fast moving frog, okay? Either some kind of flapping frog, this little teckle here that got some metal feet, some flash, some sound, so maybe something like this. Something that I can cast out and reel back. Again, it's covering water. So that same situation where I'm in the back of that cut, I want to fish that grassland. I want to fish that shoreline, and having a frog that I can actually reel and pause and reel and just cover water allows me to cover water quicker. And that is my starting frog. And then if once I find them and I need some kind of walking frog, I'll go with that Bobby's Perfect or the Bullywah or the Gavacho, you know, little popping frog. And then, like I said, if I need to, if I find myself fishing for highly pressured fish or fish that are blowing up on smaller bait, that's when I go with the Kayara, however you want to pronounce it. I think it's spelled K-A-E-R-A, I believe. Again, I'll link it down below, but that's a fun little finesse frog. So again, highland reservoirs, lowland reservoirs, all the way backs in those pockets, I'm looking for active fish, okay? Couple other shallow baits for you. Some kind of little square bill, okay? Either the BDS-1 or the Fat John 50, something I can move quickly, pop it through the grass. Again, it's all about moving. It's all about being aggressive, getting real aggressive with that bait. Don't be afraid to burn it too fast. Burn, 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 pause. Burn, 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 pause. Hit the grass, rip, rip. Burn, 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 pause. You know, these fish are active. They're going to eat. So a square bill, top water, either that walking bait or the frog. Now a square bill, and then some kind of underspin. You know, if you can get away with an exposed hook, again, you want to add a little bit of flash to your swim bait. I'm going with either our underspin or maybe an owner flashy swimmer. If I have to go weedless, I want to fish through and around that grass, I might go with a weedless underspin, but I'm gonna have some kind of flashy swimmer, some kind of flash on my swimmer with that underspin. And then last but not least, this is where the jerk bait really comes in. You know, this is a bait, that's that Mega Bass 110 Junior +1. That's quickly become my favorite. It's a downsized jerk bait. It's a little bit smaller than your traditional 110s, really. It's just it's a junior, but that's a finesse jerk bait that I have a ton of confidence in, and it just catches them. If you're in that grass, you got to go with the fluke. Again, this is the shallow approach to that Highland Reservoir. Actually, it's a shallow approach to all of these, but we started off talking about that Highland Reservoir. So now that we have the baits, that fluke, rig that on a 4/0 super line hook, gives that bait a little bit of weight so you can cast it on a bait caster. But twitch, 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 pause. Twitch, 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 pause. Again, active fish. Don't be afraid to move your baits quickly. Okay. We ran through the shallow baits. We talked about the back of a Highland Reservoir. Let's talk about shallow for the other types of fisheries, and then we will switch gears and go deep. Okay, so that is basically, I ran the gamut of my shallow water baits. Now those can be applied to any of the different style of reservoirs or fisheries we're gonna talk about here shortly. I started talking about your Highland reservoirs getting all the way in the back. That goes for your lowland reservoirs as well. Again, you're not gonna have those long river arms. You're not gonna have, it's not necessarily as featureless as a natural lake, but you're gonna have a lot less contour lines, real abrupt breaks, river channels, that sort of stuff. So spend some time getting the backs of those cuts. Again, you're finding those areas, maybe there's an arm that has 2 or 3 little cuts in it, doesn't have like 100 like a Highland Reservoir. Go check each of those 3 cuts, the very backs, and see if one has grass or one has bait. Spend some time, move quickly, spend some time on your electronics, but try and find those bait fish, because again, this time of the year you find the bait, you find the bass. Now you might find that in the very back of all 3 you have fish blowing up or corralling them. You might find that in just one of the 3. This time of the year, I like the coves that have a creek channel. If you're fishing those 3 or you're searching those 3 and only one has the creek channel, that's what I would start with. Check the middle of the creek. A lot of times those fish will hang out in the middle of the creek and push those fish to the back. But again, it's about covering water. And then once you find them, once you find the bait, you will find the bass. So we talked about the shallow baits. One other bait I didn't really mention yet, be the blade bait. Now that we're getting close, cooler weather, cooler water, gonna start going into wintertime, a blade bait is another awesome bait. Now that bait can be fished just like a lipless crank. It can be fished shallow and deep, but it's awesome this time of the year up dirt shallow. Again, like I mentioned that video a couple weeks ago, these fish go insanely shallow. I mean, inches of water blowing up shad. So don't be afraid to check shallow. And again, look for that lively grass. If it's dying back, look for that nice green grass. And a lot of times those baby bluegill, the baby crappie, the threadfins, the gizzards are gonna be in and around that grass, and that's where you'll find the bass. Okay. Lowland, same thing like I talked about. As far as a natural lake, again, it's all about features on a natural lake. Just the little inconsistencies, the little details. Maybe it's just a little foot drop or a little break, something like that. That's where those fish are going to sit. But again, they're going to be pushing those fish shallow to keep them corralled to feed on them all through the fall and into winter. Again, if you can find a stump or a log or a tire or something, even if it's man-made, something out there in the backs of those bays or that cut, those fish are gonna hold on that. So if you find that sort of stuff, that stuff can be gold. Now, as far as ponds, basically consider a pond like a Highland Reservoir or a lowland reservoir, right? Highland, let's call it a Highland pond. You're gonna have a real tall dam, real narrow dam, real tall, and you might have some real steep walls. Maybe it's like a quarry or something like that. Treat that fishery, and the advice that I'm giving you will apply to that style of pond. On the flip side, if you have a real flat pond, lots of grass, a real long dam, maybe it's out in a pasture or something like that, treat your pond like a lowland reservoir. Now, for you guys on river systems, okay? This time of the year, you have to cover water. You have to find the backs of pockets. Some of these arms or backwaters on Tennessee River are their own lakes, right? They're huge. You can spend days upon days just fishing backwaters. Again, a lot like I talked about in the lowland and highland reservoirs. Look for backs of pockets that have creeks. Look for backs of pockets that have a little bit deeper water close by. And a lot of times those are gonna be your better pockets up shallow, okay? Now let's talk about the deep fish, okay? We talked about this in the very beginning. We talked about shallow fish and deep fish. Deep fish this time of the year can be extremely fun and extremely frustrating. I cannot tell you how many times I've been out fishing and the bite is just lackluster, right? Just kind of meh, just not that great. Maybe even worming, dragging a shaky head or a Nico rig or something. And then all of a sudden, 50 yards out past you over 100, 200 feet of water, just bombs start dropping. That is why I always have that top water rigged and ready. Even if I'm fishing deeper water, you know, 20, 30, 40 foot, even if I'm fishing deeper water, I always have a top water, because those fish come up schooling, and if you can make an accurate cast and get on them in a hurry, you can catch one, sometimes two, three at a time. That's how ferocious those fish are. But it can be frustrating, because a lot of times those fish are out there just swimming with the bait balls. Now, with the advancements in technology with side imaging and 360 and forward-facing sonar, it allows you to stay on those bait balls a little bit easier and more accurately now. So now you can make more accurate casts and stay on that bait ball, even though it's not on the surface, it's not visible with your eyes. But the deep fish can, like I said, can be awesome, and they can be frustrating. So as far as deep fish, I'm referencing like your let's say 12 to like 20, 25 foot, right? My number one bait this time of the year, it's why we designed it, is the speed crank, the Tactical DD, right? There's a couple different crankbaits that work really well in this season. This is hands down our number one. It's why we developed it. You know, burn, pause. 8-to-1 gear ratio reel. You're covering water, you're down there grinding, you're trying to find those active fish, and when you burn and pause, burn, pause, boom, I mean, they hammer it. So the speed crank from now all the way through winter is one of my favorite ways to catch them in that 12 to like 20 foot range. Again, even if you're not hitting bottom on some of that deeper stuff, they'll come up on that pause and knock slack in your line, even in cold water. So that speed crank, the Tactical DD, the Deep X 300 are both phenomenal baits this time of the year. But again, the deep fish, so on that Highland Reservoir, if you're a Highland Reservoir guy, even though I say deep, I'm not necessarily talking like open water by the dam. You know, I'm looking for main lake points, you know, points that are long tape. That fish was huge. You guys probably heard that explosion. Long tapering points. A lot of times this time of the year, they're not necessarily gonna sit on top of the point, but they might be sitting off the sides. So I like to make a bomber cast with that crankbait and just grind that thing uphill. If I hit a stump or if I hit a rock, I'm gonna pause it, but again, a burn, pause. Those fish are sitting off the side. They're looking up to feed. So I'm not necessarily talking about open water. If you can find areas, like I said, long tapering points, offshore rock piles, you know, maybe that secondary point or that main lake point has good structure on it, those fish are gonna hold on that and wait for those bait balls to come over them and ambush from those. So I'm looking for channel swings where that river channel comes closer to shore or closer to a point. A lot of times those fish are gonna sit in that area and hold, and again, work that bait up into the shallow. So you could be in the main bowl, the main body of your Highland Reservoir, you know, and you might, I mean, it could be a couple hundred feet deep, but as you get closer, there's a real abrupt break, right? So say it goes from like 90 foot to 25 foot. A lot of times those fish are gonna sit right there on that ledge and they're gonna push forward. So maybe that 25 foot goes to a high spot or an island top. They're gonna sit on that break, on that lip, and they're gonna push those fish towards the shallows. So again, you can catch them on the top water, you can catch them with the crank, but those fish are gonna be a little bit deeper, but you can definitely catch them this time of the year. A little bit more on the highland reservoirs. You know, if you can find like your bluff walls, you know, a lot of times you run up river, there may or may not be current depending on if they're dropping the water level on you or not. But if you can find those bluff walls where that channel swing, where that current or that river arm comes, and you'll see on a contour line on a map, you'll see the real tight black lines where it's real abrupt. Where you got your bluff wall and where that river channel comes, where it touches, where it hits that bluff wall, that's usually where I start, and I'll fish the first 25, 50 yards of that. That's typically where I'm gonna get bit. Right there where that river swing and hits that bluff wall is going to be money. So offshore, like I said, island tops, start with your top water, start with your crankbait. You'll see those active fish that they're blowing up. And again, fish those channel swings. If you can find the secondary points leading into the backs of these big coves, those work well this time of the year as well. Those fish we talked about that transition as they kind of use those secondary points, either working their way back out to the main body or as they're working their way back into those shallow coves. But check those points along the way and you guys will find fish. Again, move quickly this time of the year especially. Lowland reservoirs, deep guys, fish offshore. You know, get a good map card for your system, get a good, you know, either Lake Master Plus or Navionics or whatever app on your phone. Look at those high spots out there on the main body. Look at those little isolated creek channels. Follow those creek channels. Those fish are gonna be along that break somewhere, okay? There's not a lot of, typically on your lowland reservoirs, there's not a lot of real drastic contour lines, real steep breaks. If you find those are gonna be golden, so definitely fish those. But look for little subtleties, right? Where those breaks are near those offshore humps or islands, and that's where those fish are going to be. Again, I'm targeting them with a crankbait, I'm targeting them with a top water. If they are super deep, let me back up. One bait that works well in all of these categories that I haven't even talked about yet, and this is gonna be my bread and butter all the way through winter, is going to be some kind of a rig, okay? This is a little tactical mini rig we did last year, a little bit smaller blades, lighter wire. It's really a condensed rig. It's made for like your 3.3s, 3.8 size Kitex or swim baits. This is gonna be my bread and butter offshore. Again, if I'm fishing a highland reservoir or a lowland reservoir, I'm fishing those areas that we just talked about, I'm chucking and winding. Again, in my opinion, this is your best bait to mimic a school of shad or baby bluegill, gizzard shad, something like that. Again, I love this bait. It's not one of those things where you just chuck it out there and it catches everything. Add your rod twitches, your reel twitches, get really active with that bait as well. With those rod twitches, you know, it kind of condenses that bait ball and then expands just like a natural bait ball would. But an A-rig is probably my number, after the crankbait, it's probably my number 2 subsurface bait. Now, getting back to super deep, like I just mentioned, 2 other baits that come into play on lowland and highland reservoirs. One is gonna be a jigging spoon. That's the Blade Runner, that's the dust spoon, like 1.75 ounces. Even though that sounds heavy, you want this bait to get down quickly, right? You wanna thumb your spool, let that thing, if you add a little bit of resistance on your thumb, let that thing fall vertically, get down to that 20, 30, 40, 50 foot range. Some of these spotted bass fisheries, these fish are gonna be in 40 to 50 foot. Get that thing down there, hop, hop, let it fall on semi-taut line, and it's gonna do this. Dying shad, dying bait fish, right? But when you're using your 2D sonar and you see those fish are straight down, thumb that spool, drop it down, give it a little bit of resistance. It's gonna fall straight down quickly. That's why you use that 1 3/4 ounce. But a jigging spoon, you know, find that school, reel it up just above their head, and then hop it, let it fall. Hop it, let it fall. And again, this thing's doing this on the way down, and you can have a lot of fun on your ultra deep fish with a spoon. And another great one right here, the Daracoup, little tail spin. That's a 3/4 ounce bait. The 1 ounce bait works great as well. But again, same situation. You find those offshore fish, your lowland, highland reservoir fish out deeper water. That tail spin is a great bait fish mimicking bait. You know, you can fish this on your bluff walls, throw it, let it fall down vertically along the wall. You can fish it off your main lake points, kind of hop it back, let it swim down, hop it down, kind of like a, I mean, you can feel this thing vibrate so much. Let it fall. And because it's that 3/4 ounce or that 1 ounce, it falls fairly quick. That tail's spinning on the way down. The fish are schooled up. Again, they're fired up. They're looking to eat anything that has flash, anything that has movement. So that tail spin is another awesome, awesome bait if you're on them out deep, okay? That applies to your lowland fish as well. River fish, out on the river deep or deeper water. Again, this time of the year, I'm still looking backwaters, but I'm looking towards the mouths of the main river. So if you're on a river fishery or a current driven system, I'm going to the main entrances to your big backwaters. As they drop the water, if they do, those fish are gonna be pulling out to that main mouth. But again, I'm fishing that deeper area as it breaks off into the river channel with the same baits here. You river guys, they're actually in creeks, like actually moving rapid water, you know, water with rapids, quickly moving water. These fish are not afraid to be just below the whitewater, okay? So if you have a pool or a deeper area, those fish are gonna sit right up top in that current, basically nosed into that whitewater. So don't be afraid to take a Ned rig or a square bill or your favorite swim bait and chuck it right into that whitewater and move it. Again, these fish are active. They're not afraid of that cold water. It's not completely cold now, it's comfortable. They're gonna be right up there in that moving water. As far as your ponds, guys, all right, let's talk about natural lakes. Deep fish, it's all about rock. From what I've found on those natural lakes, if you can find, like we talked about earlier, shallow, find those little inconsistencies, same thing applies out deep. Natural lake, you know, find rock. Do a lot of side imaging. Hopefully you found that stuff during the pre-spawn transition, you know, that summer season. Hopefully you did some side imaging and found some offshore rock, but these fish are gonna hang on that all fall and then winter long. So that offshore rock. If you're a guy that wants to throw a big bait, I mean, I can't tell you how many fish Matt and I caught on an 8-inch or bigger swim bait during this transition all the way into winter. You know, you find those fish. The cool thing about the natural lake, with it as featureless as they usually are, when you find a thing, it typically is a thing, right? So those fish are gonna use it all different seasons. They're gonna come and go from it. And once you find that, make sure you check it. So if it was something that was good pre-spawn, definitely check it now, because those fish are gonna come out, they're gonna sit on it. If it's an isolated piece of structure, the biggest fish in the area is gonna sit on it, so you can take advantage of them on your bigger baits, your bigger flutter spoons, or your bigger swim baits, okay? But natural lakes, it's all about rock. That speed crank, that A-rig, your lipless crank, those sort of things are what I've really caught them on really well in the past. But again, it's covering water and finding where those bait balls are. Unfortunately, sometimes those fish go offshore, but you will find the bait, right? You'll see the blowups offshore. Now with the you know, newer technology, it's easier to stay on those fish, and you can really put a hurting on them with some kind of underspin, right? Even though they're deeper fish, you can put a little bit larger head underspin on there and fish below those bait balls and pick off those fish out there on those deeper bait balls. But for your natural fisheries, natural lakes, you know, it's all about those little pieces of cover. So if you found them already, check the ones that you found and waypointed, and if not, spend some time behind your graph. You know, look for anything that's a little bit deeper. So maybe it's a little bit of a creek channel, or an old lake level. Maybe the water was low for a couple years and it eroded the shoreline. Now it's back up. So now, you know, a distance offshore, you have a kind of a lip where that water eroded that old shoreline away, and those fish are going to sit on that too. But ponds, again, we talked about it. Quarries, you know, your quarry ponds, your deeper ponds, fish it like a highland reservoir, and you guys are going to catch fish. I won't necessarily use a crankbait as much in the shallower grassy lakes, unless it's like a square bill. But if you can get away with throwing some kind of deep diving crank, having that real tight wobble and that speed really mimics those bait fish well this time of the year, and you can really catch them on that guy right there. An A-rig, I can't say that I've used an A-rig a lot in a pond, but if it's fairly deep, fairly clear, you know, you can get away with it. Just make sure. A lot of times in my mind, at least, I'm thinking like pond fishing, I'm thinking of shore fishing or float tube fishing, maybe even kayak fishing. You know, you don't have the accessibility, so if you do get hung up, you kind of lose your lures. So be cognizant of that, really think about that. If you are out on the water and you can get your lures back, 100% use that crank, use that A-rig. But if you're shore-based, you know, use something that's not down on the bottom and has the opportunity to get hung up and snagged where you lose it. So if I'm a pond fisherman, I'm going shallow with a top water, either a walking bait or a frog, some kind of underspin, maybe even a blade bait, and then deeper water, I'm going with that crank or the A-rig if I have the ability to, and I think that I won't necessarily get hung up. But guys, the fall time is an amazing time to get out on the water. It's a great time. It's more comfortable. The mornings are cool. You know, this morning was, like I said, in the 50s, basically a hoodie. You're all kind of bundled up. In the evening, it's warm. You know, these fish are still active because those water temps are dropping, more oxygen in the water. It really is a great time to get out on the water. But again, cover water, find those bait fish, the schools of baby crappie or bluegill or threadfin or gizzard shad, whatever they may be. Maybe you're on an alewife lake or a herring lake. Find the bait fish and you will find the bass. Guys, if you have any questions, please leave those down below in the comments section. Again, I kind of blew through the baits because for the most part, we've really talked about the majority of these in depth the last few videos. I did add the A-rig in there and the spoon and the tailspin because those are lights out on your deep fish. So I will link those down below in the video description. But guys, again, great time to get out. If you have any questions, please leave them down below. If you learned something from this video or you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you guys on the next video.